Hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to another office hours, monthly office hours for Microsoft 365 full stack devs. Be curious to see if you can double check my microphone was on. I'm just curious to see if you can hear me, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, there we go. We got one person to let me know in the chat. So thank you very much. I'm also curious if my voice is a little out of sync with the video. It was perfect about 15 minutes ago, and then right before I went live, it looked a little bit off. So I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be correct or not. So if you would, just let me know in the chat. Unfortunately, not a whole lot I can do about it right now that we're live. So it looks good. I see yes, 5x5. That's good. Awesome. So thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with this today. So first of all, welcome to all of you who are new, that you are first, or you're first joining us. A little bit of lag. Okay, well, I wish I knew how to fix that, but unfortunately, I don't have much of a way to do it. Looks like I might have hit echo on that. So tell me, did the actually do me a favor right now. So if you can let me know now if you can still hear me. So just give me like a thumbs up or just say something in the chat that you can hear me. It's cool, you can still hear me. Okay, so I think there was a little bit of an echo that was there for a second. So hopefully that the audio is acceptable now. It's only the second time I've done this, so apologies. I'm getting the hang of it. I'll learn a little bit. You've seen worse, Don. Well, that's good that I'm not the worst one you've seen. I just wonder if it's like I'm not that bad. It's kind of like there's food that we always say that is, hey, it's great, not so good, or whatever. So anyway. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started with this. If you would sound off where you're dialing in from, where you're connecting from. So I'm connecting from St. Augustine, Florida, in the United States. It's actually pretty chilly. It's like in the 50 degrees, which, or at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. I have no idea what that is Celsius off the top of my head. Welcome to a bunch of you that have joined us. For the names I recognize, Adam, welcome. Don, welcome. Daniel, we're going to get your question. I saw you post your question, and I will definitely cover it when we get to the Q&A part. Ofer, I hope I pronounced that right. It's nice to see you. I definitely recognize your name. I know we've gone back and forth a few times. Kurt, good to see you. Chattanooga, Tennessee, welcome, whoever that is, U5. That's about what it is for me as well right now. It's 58 Fahrenheit. Eric from Folsom, welcome. Rick. Is that Rick T? Do I recognize that? Do I recognize you now? John Charles, good to see you. Adam from Liverpool, I definitely recognize you. Adam was and Kurt were well, I guess I shouldn't disclose where you were for privacy stuff. But anyway, thank you very much for joining me recently. Cool. Well, I'm glad everybody is chiming in here. I'm looking forward to this today. Cool. Good. Now I know who you are, U5. Awesome. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Let me switch over to my slides. And there we go. I'm a little picture-in-picture man now. I got a few things I want to cover with you. I want to talk about Kenny from Nigeria. Awesome. I recognize your name. I know we've traded emails as well. Okay, so let's run through like what we're going to do with this. So what is this office hours? I do the, this office hours session, or this AMA, is intended to be for Microsoft 365 full stack developers. So for those of you who are not looking for, the no code or low code approach, I use the term full stack dev because to me that best describes the people that I like to work with, or that I'm most comfortable working with, and that I like to focus on. We are generally creating web apps, and so we're doing a lot of client-side work, but then we also do anything server-side that we need to facilitate those web apps. So anything related to authentication or security, database, data storage, back-end services, all of that kind of stuff. We still do all of that, like Azure-based stuff. But it's all with the intent of primarily building web apps. I mean, we may be building services like even, the big one today that everyone's focused on, is interested in, is building Copilot plugins. Those are just web services. There's no UI to them, but I still consider that like a full stack developer thing. That's why I use the term full stack. I really dislike the term that we see a lot of our Microsoft colleagues use called, where they like to use the term pro devs. And I don't like that because I think that that kind of excludes anybody who's just getting into this and just seems very like, it's not really great. Absolutely, Kurt. Yeah. So I include Copilot plugins in my questions. So nobody's asked me a question on that, but let me frame a little bit about who this is for, to make sure that, if you've got a question, feel free to ask it. And if you're not sure, just ask it. I'll tell you, I don't know. So the things I like to focus on with this, I used to do these office hours just for the Ultimate Bundle, students of the Ultimate Bundle of my SharePoint Framework course. But honestly, I didn't have as many people joining that on a monthly basis as I had hoped. And I really want to open this up to more people. So I know that I can answer the questions from my Ultimate Bundle students in the time that we have today. But then we can also help a lot of other people as well. So that's why I've taken this to a live stream, and I've done this through my YouTube channel. So what kinds of things can we focus on? What are we going to talk about? Well, I'm going to do a little bit of talk about some updates around the SharePoint framework. Very little bit there. I'm going to talk a little bit about some updates related to Microsoft Teams. There's also a big topic that is it's not new. It started in late January and really kind of came to crescendo at the end of February, beginning of March this month. But it seems like a lot of people just started to notice it. I actually just really noticed the February news about a week or two ago. So we'll talk a little bit about that related to the Microsoft 365 developer program. I talked a little bit about some of this stuff in my newsletter this week. So if you're not a subscriber to my newsletter, definitely do that. You can do that at newsletter.voitanos.io, or if you just use that link that you see there at the bottom of the slide. I'll go ahead and put this in the chat. That voitanos.social, that link that you see there, is going to take you to kind of like one of those like link in bio type pages. That's kind of like a page that just has a link to a bunch of articles I've done. But then there's this row of a bunch of different social media icons, including an email that is where you can subscribe to my newsletter, a bi-weekly newsletter that's focused for people, the same group that I would like to have here join us on this live stream. The other thing I'm happy to talk a lot about is SharePoint Embedded. I am like up to here right now with SharePoint Embedded. I'm going to do this really quick here, so I don't want to. I'm making sure it's in the picture-in-picture, but this is like what you see here. This is like my agenda because I'm teaching a class next week on SharePoint Embedded. Still working on all the content. My virtual desktop, like one over from the one that I'm on right now, is filled with VS Code instances and documentation and slides and code and everything of a class that I'm teaching to Microsoft next week. But it's an area that I'm really interested in. I'm spending a lot of time in these days. So if you got a question about SharePoint Embedded, feel free to definitely ask me or fire a question that way. I'm more than happy to answer questions about that. And then anything else that you think is Microsoft 365 developer or like associated to that topic. So like I'm happy to go through and try and answer those questions. And if I can't answer them, I'll flat out tell you I don't know the answer. I mean, Kurt and I were just joking a little bit here in the chat. A little bit from we had a conversation yesterday about working with Copilot plugins, and I immediately was thinking Microsoft 365 Copilot plugins. Kurt was working with, I think it was Bing chat Copilot plugins. I think what we're finding is that Copilot is just turning into be an industry term, not just a Microsoft term, and it means really everywhere. It's all over the board. So I don't know much about the plugin story outside of Microsoft 365 Copilot, but I can definitely talk to that. I see in the chat if it's Jean-Paul, I hope I got that right, or I don't think it's Jean-Paul, but I think it's Jean-Paul. You said talk about SharePoint Embedded. Happy to do that. You got a question? Post it in the chat. Kurt, SharePoint Embedded about premium features. I will definitely get to that. Let's do it this way. I'm going to run through the stuff that I had planned that I want to cover first. Then that I'll go through that really quick. Then I've got 2 questions that 2 people submitted ahead of time. I'm going to answer those right away. And then I'm going to come back and answer any of the questions that all of you have. So if you got a question, post it in the chat. More than happy. I will definitely keep an eye on everything in the chat. And for those of you who are in my SharePoint Framework, are a alumni of my SharePoint Framework course, or of the Ultimate Bundle, or if you have joined my office hours, then sorry, let me say this again. I was looking, made sure I had Discord open. If you are a student of the Ultimate Bundle of my SharePoint Framework course, Mastering the SharePoint Framework, you have access to a office hours section where you can go through and post your questions in the office hours. Same thing for those of you who are members of or alumni of my Microsoft Teams App Dev Accelerator. Please go through and post your questions in the office hours as well. You also have access to that same office hours section, and your questions are the priority that come up. So for those of you who are new to this, please feel free to post that question. Please feel free to post a question in the chat, and I will definitely get to your questions first. But I mean, like all of us, I need to make sure I help my former customers first. Okay, so I will come back to those, but I do see, Kurt, your questions in the chat, and I will definitely come back to those. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start diving into some of the slides. So State of the Union with the SharePoint Framework, nothing new, right? This is all, we're working off the release 1.18.2. This came out a little while ago, a couple months ago, so I have nothing new to report here, so I'm not going to dwell on this slide because I went through this exact same thing in my office hours last month as well. However, what is new or news is we're expecting the next version of the SharePoint Framework, a beta, to ship really any day now. It could be today, could be tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe the following week. But the next version is going to be version 1.19. 2 of the things that they were talking about that would be part of this release are already available. That's the bot-enabled adaptive card extensions, and that I will post a chat to in the, sorry, wrong one. Let's go back a slide. That one. All right, I will post a link to this in the chat to where you can learn more about how to do bot-enabled adaptive card extensions. And then the other one is the Viva Connections Card Designer is also available. There are some other things that they've talked about doing here. We will see how far they get with this in 1.19. We'll see. We're just waiting for the beta to drop to find out what's in there yet. I've yet to see it, so I'm waiting for it as well because I know I'm working on some docs for them, some documentation for them around some stuff around adaptive card extensions that's going to be new in 1.19. So if you want to see what that is, make sure you jump over to what's it called? You can jump over to the pull requests for the SP Dev Docs repo on GitHub, where all the docs are, and you'll see something about ACEs that was submitted by somebody else, but I'm working on that with them second I get access to the beta. Okay, the next thing I want to touch on is some stuff related to Microsoft Teams. So there are a couple things that have happened in the last couple weeks. Microsoft has released a developer preview for doing API-based message extensions in Teams. I'll jump over here and show you what this is, and I'll grab this link and post it in the chat as well. This is a way for us using the Teams developer portal to, instead of having to create a code-based message extensions, one of the things that we could do is that we could add a we can have if we have an API that is exposed its schema, we don't have to go through and write the message extension via code. We can actually go to the developer portal and we can create a new message extension by just pasting in the URL of the message extension of the API, and Teams will be able to figure out what that is, like how to interact with that API. based on the schema that's provided. This is currently in preview. You can see there's a whole bunch of commands that you can add to it, so it'll allow you to view all the different things that are available to us in this extension or in this new capability. I've played with it a little bit. It's fine. It's nice if you already have an API that's already done. I kind of like the idea of having a little more control with code, but that's just my preference. But this is a new feature that Microsoft is adding. Another thing that has happened is that Microsoft has released the new version of the Teams Toolkit, version 5.6.0. This doesn't include too much stuff that's new here. Let's drop this in the chat. The big thing here that they've done with this, and this is actually to I believe it's David's question, so I might as well answer the question now, is related to now you can deploy your tab-based apps as an Azure Static Web App. So David's question that he had was, well, actually, let me finish what I'm saying. I'll come to David's question because it's just appropriate at the time. Is that before we were using web apps that had like a server-side component to it, but when we build these apps for Teams-based apps, today the one that we generally are using is the tab using with React and using Fluent UI, which means it's 100% client-side. We do have an Azure function that's kind of a sidecar app to it that we can work with, but we don't have. We weren't using static web apps. Microsoft has flipped that around to where now they default to creating a static web app and they deploy our React-based tabs using an Azure Static web app from your repository. I love the idea of using just static web apps for this. So David's question was, in his recent update of the Teams Toolkit in VS Code, the README mentioned the static web apps are now supported, or at least the scaffolding is for front-end and back-end combination for tab-based apps. So his statement was that his personal experience with static web apps was that a few years ago, when there seemed to be some gaps in the implementation, particularly around authentication. And do you think it's time to try static web apps again in the context of Teams tabs apps? And in my opinion, the answer is yes. I think it's fine. So first of all, your concern about authentication, I don't disagree with you that it was a little bit of an issue. I can't speak to the current state of it. However, with that being said, what I would do is in my static web, if I'm using static web apps for a Teams app, I would make sure that the apps are only going to load when they're loaded from within an iframe from the teams.microsoft.com domain. Using like CSR or the X-frame options, which I'm actually going to talk about in another update in just a minute. Really, you want it to be teams.cloud.microsoft. So we'll come back to that in a sec. So I like it, and the reason why is because like when it comes to authentication, you're not going to be doing any authentication with your static web app. Instead, you're going to be relying on the person being authenticated with Microsoft Teams. So I feel pretty comfortable about using Azure Static Web Apps. I'm a pretty big fan of that. So yeah, I do like that. Another option here, and this is in my slides, but I might as well just stay in my demo here, is that, and this is a little hard to read, but Microsoft also updated what they called the TeamsFx CLI, but is now called the Teams Toolkit CLI. And we used to install that by using, actually, let me jump over here to my slides because this kind of explains it. The Teams Toolkit CLI v3, this used to be called the TeamsFx CLI, and we would install it by doing npm install at Microsoft TeamsFx CLI. That's changed. That was the latest version of that was 2.1.1. You can now uninstall the TeamsFx CLI and replace it with this one, the Teams App CLI. This is the v3 version of the CLI. They changed the name of it. And so now whenever I want to use it, instead of calling TeamsFx, I'm going to call Teams App. So Teams App space deploy or Teams App space provision. That's the new version that they want to use here. We knew this was coming last time we got together, but this is the brand new one that they've come out with. And it's just kind of like a branding change. Adam, I did see your question. I'm going to come back to you about the ACEs and just when I finish the team stuff. The next update that's big here is the last bullet point you see is about being prepared for the new Teams domain. What Microsoft is doing, they announced this sometime last year that they were going to standardize their Microsoft 365 user-centric apps to a single domain called cloud.microsoft. So instead of it being just microsoft.com, they were going to say like all user apps were going to be on cloud.microsoft. So the new domain for Teams that's coming is teams.cloud.microsoft. This is going to happen in June of this year. What you need to do to be prepared for this is that if you are using anything like CSR, content security policies, or if, as I just mentioned to David a minute ago, if you're using any kind of restrictions on your apps to make sure they only load from within specific iframes, you want to make sure that you use, let's put my face up here. Let's do that. Yeah, I just noticed that sometimes the subscribe thing is actually going to overlap me. That you're making sure that if you're using X-frame options or CSR, that you have not just whitelisted the teams.microsoft.com domain, but you also are going to allow the teams.cloud.microsoft domain, which is when we'll all start switching over to that. And that applies not just to the web clients, that applies to desktop clients and mobile clients as well, because they all load from that same domain. Okay, so that's something else you want to pay attention to there. Cores, you also want to pay attention to it with cores. It's going to have the same kind of impact as well with cores. So if you're blocking domains, you want to make sure that is a domain that you're also that you're explicitly allowing domains, I should say, not blocking. But if you're with cores, if you're whitelisting specific domains or your allow list is specific, you want to make sure that teams.cloud.microsoft is also in that list prior to June. So if you can, like today, ideally, like what I did for my app is I went in and I had teams.microsoft.com was in my X-frame options and my CSP. I went through and I added in teams.cloud.microsoft, and then sometime in Q3 or Q4 of this calendar year, I'll go back and remove teams.microsoft.com because as the old domain, because nobody will be using it again. By then. Okay, so here's one more thing I want to cover before I start jumping into questions here. This is big, and this is related to the Microsoft 365 developer program. So what did we have before today? Prior to today, Microsoft gave us the ability we could have like a Microsoft account, an MSA, like an Outlook.com account. We could show up and we could create a brand new developer program account and use that to create a brand new Microsoft 365 tenant or a sandbox tenant. This was great for developers. I recommended every single Microsoft 365 developer have their own developer tenant for all development, all testing. Not one that's shared, but everybody should have their own. Unfortunately, there was a nation state attack in January that you might have heard of called Midnight Blizzard. It was by a group called Nobelium. I believe the nation state was Russia, but I might be wrong. I think I'm right on that one. I've got a couple links here that I'm going to just post a couple links to this and post 3 links in succession to the chat real quick here. So that's the actual dev program change. This is the result of it, and then this is an update to it. So I got three links there. So the first link here is information about the developer program, and I'll go through this in just a moment. The fallout from this is the zero trust policy security stance that Microsoft now has, which basically says that we don't trust anything. We always assume breach. We always use least privilege, and we also have to explicitly verify the identity of who someone is. And why is that? Well, you can learn more about this, about Microsoft's actions from Nobelium and from Midnight Blizzard. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about some of the stuff I know about this. I've heard some stuff. I've got some friends that work on the security response team at Microsoft. I talked to one of them recently who could share as much as he was allowed to share, but basically said you wouldn't believe what they did and how they compromised this, and how they compromised some stuff with Microsoft because of this. I'm not going to go into detail about the stuff that I heard because I don't think it's fair, or I don't know if it's the smart thing to do. I will just say that it's what my understanding is that if you have a developer account, it's not like they were able to compromise the Microsoft 365 developer program. They did it wasn't just the developer program, they did other stuff as well. But the Microsoft 365 developer program, the way that this is related to the lockdown or the limitation that Microsoft rolled out here, and let me go back to my slides, is that it's not that they were able to get any data from anybody, is that they were able to compromise the program, create en masse lots of developer program accounts and tenants, and then to use them in nefarious ways. And what that meant is that they were able to also send, like, think about it, they could send a ton of emails as like phishing attacks, and all of them were from the onmicrosoft.com address, which is a trusted domain, but when they sent that out, it was no longer really a trusted domain, and it plummeted a bunch of stuff. So what Microsoft did was they said, okay, here's the deal. From this point going forward, the only way that you're going to be able to get a Microsoft 365 developer tenant is if we can validate your identity. And the way most organizations do, and even with like free services, the way most organizations do this, including Microsoft Azure that does this, is that you're going to have to be validated with a credit card, because that's how they prove your identity. And then there's only a certain number of like subscriptions that can be tied to that credit card per person. So like for Azure, if you want to get an Azure subscription, you can get the $200 monthly credit for a certain amount of time while you play with your Azure resources and learn how to use Azure. But you still have to put a credit card in to verify your identity. You're just not charged anything unless you go over that $200 trial license that they get, or trial credits that they give you. The 365 developer program is going to move in that direction as well, where we're going to have to provide a credit card to be able to validate our identity. Doesn't mean you're going to get charged anything. Just means you're going to have to use a credit card to do it. Now the challenge is that there's a bunch of engineering work that's going to have to happen to make that work. I'm not going to go into detail on this because frankly I'm not entirely sure what is considered NDA and what's public. But I know I haven't gone up to that line yet. Just know that this isn't something. Microsoft is well aware of the problem. They have a solution that they're working on, but it is not and they're well aware of the pain that this is causing the developer community for Microsoft 365 developers like us. However, it's just going to take time to get this done, and there's just no choice. There's no way around it. You can just trust me that I'm confident that they're doing the right thing. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So right now, the only way you can get a developer tenant through a Microsoft 365 developer program is either you have a subscription, a Visual Studio subscription, or you have a partner account. And the first link that I just pasted in the chat when I had the 3 successive links back to back, it lists out the different partner programs that you can use, like an ISV program or something like that. Aside from that, if you don't have a Visual Studio subscription or you don't have a partner account, the other option is to purchase a license, a commercial license from Microsoft. So I think like an E3 is like $20 a month. I know developers aren't going to be happy about that I got to pay a subscription to do this, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, look at all the services we get for free. You can use Visual Studio Code, that's free. The hosting on Azure, $250 credits. I mean, the tools that they give us and the platform they give us, we can basically get away without spending anything. So an ask to be able to build solutions for my organization that at a max, I would have to spend $20 a month or $25 a month for an E3 license, I don't think that's really that big of an ask, especially if you think back 10 years ago when we were having to buy Visual Studio for $1,000, right? Which was not cheap, or we had to have Windows licenses to be able to start virtual machines and everything. So that's just my take on it. It will come back. I'm confident it will come back. It's just not going to come back anytime soon. And when I say that, I mean I wouldn't expect it for at least on the months scale, but I think it's still less than a year scale. So in other words, I would not hold your breath, or you won't be around to come to another office hours. If you get my picture, you get what I mean. Okay, so now we're going to tackle questions. Okay, now we're going to tackle questions. Yeah, Ofer, I believe the E3 license is $20 or $25 for an E3 license per user. The thing with the developer program is we got multiple licenses, multiple users to be able to do that. So it is going to be a per user license. I mean, generally I find that I'm always using one, but it is handy to have those developer program accounts, because when we did that, we would get 25 licenses, and we'd get those content packs. So we'd have a bunch of data loaded into the tenant that we could play with right off the bat. Just can't do that today, unfortunately. Okay, let's now switch over and do some questions here. Okay, so now I want to go through and tackle some questions with you guys. There is one question that was, so we had two questions submitted ahead of time. One was from David, and one was from, and I'm going to apologize if I mispronounce your name, Ishianisu. I hope that's right. Ishianisu VZ. So let me read out your question first, and let me just kind of give you my riff on answering your question, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do all the questions that I don't see any that have been posted in the in Discord, but I did see some of my former students post some questions in the chat. So I'm going to go back through those, including the ones on Copilot, including the ones on SharePoint Embedded. We've got plenty of time, though. Plenty of time. So if you haven't posted a question, please feel free to go ahead and post it. Okay, so let's start then with your questions. So Yashu's question. Valentine, there you go. So that's okay, so is it, how would you like for me to refer to you? Is it Yashanisu, or is it Valentine, or IVZ as your initials? Okay, so here's your question. So his question, or her question, is what you would like to learn the most right now is how to provide data analytics solutions to clients by ingesting data from third-party APIs, transforming the data, and saving it into a SQL database, and then visualizing it on Power BI or other necessary tools. So it would be ideal to be able to spin up a solution for a client within a month. For example, if a client is using RFID tags to track their assets, be it livestock, manufacturing equipment, or clothes, you want to be able to ingest this data from a third-party API and then present it to the user while making it as easy as possible for them to get custom notifications and alerts when they need be. Okay, so here's the challenge that I have with your question is that it's very vague, because you say a third-party API, and it's well, there's lots of those, and so it really depends on what's going to be available to you. The other challenge that I have here is that aside from the Power BI aspect, I don't really see anything here that is really specifically focused on what the main topic is for this AMA, which is Microsoft 365 full stack developers. So I'm going to have to kind of give you a very general response, and just how I would approach it, just kind of point you in that direction. But it's really going to have the devil's going to be in the details and the specifics around your question about your different scenarios. So first of all, in terms of how are you going to work with the data, you want to eventually get that data inside of a SQL database, like you said, for relational reasons. If the data was more document-based data, then I would use Cosmos DB for that, or Azure Table Storage for that. From there, you can use Power BI to visualize the data, create dashboards and KPIs and a whole bunch of reports and everything to your heart's content. way beyond the scope of what I want to try and cover here. There's another YouTube channel that does a really good job with Power BI called Guy in the Cube. I definitely recommend subscribing to those guys, Adam and Patrick. Great guys, totally, definitely know what they're talking about. Very, very good at that stuff. So I would kind of push you in that direction to go to get more information about how to work with Power BI. In terms of getting the data from a third-party API, that's going to really just depend how that API or how how the data is currently stored in that external system that you want to be able to ingest. What are your options? The first thing I would look to is there some sort of like a webhook model to where you could create an endpoint, and whenever data is added or pushed into that data store from like the RFID tag, like ingestion, could you then be notified when data is added, and then could you then have that notification from as a webhook sent to your web service? That web service would store that in a database, which is what your Power BI would be based on. Your Power BI workbook and dashboards will be based on, which also has some reporting and notification capabilities in it as well. So that's just the gist of that. That's how I would approach it, and it all is going to depend though on like where's the data, that third-party service that you're working with. What kind of data do they have? Where is it? How do they work with it? I mean, there's a couple different ways you can do that. I'm just not, without knowing that, it's hard to be even more specific. Kurt, I saw your question about can I send the URL on how to request a dev account from Partner Center, and can I send that URL? I don't have specifics on that, so I'm not a partner, and so I would assume you go into Partner Center, and there's something related to benefits, and then from those benefits from being a partner, one of them should be listed as being able to create a developer tenant from the Microsoft 365 developer tenant. As a Microsoft MVP, I have a site that I can log into. I can see a list of all of my benefits from that, including a Visual Studio subscription, which is how I get my developer account using my Visual Studio subscription. But I see a list of benefits there as well. I'm just not a partner, so I don't have visibility into how that's set up. So I can't give you a link because I don't know where to go. I know it's partner. I think it's partner.microsoft.com. I don't know where it is inside a Partner Center to be able to point you to get that developer account. I will say, I did not just mean to close that. Here's what I will do. I'll grab this link. This link that I'm posting in the chat is from send it. Oh, it's too long. Oh, lovely. Well, let's just do this then. How about Bitly? Let's just do a short link with Bitly. Get started for free. No, just give me a short link. Okay, you know what I'm gonna do? Here, when you go to the blog post, this is the link that let me put my screen. There we go. So this is the link that I'm referring to as the Cloud AI Partner Program. I would go there to find a link for the different options that we have. This is a list of all those options that you see right here. So sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that one. Okay, so let me go back through some of the questions that people have submitted during our chat, and so I can start answering some of these. That's all the questions that have been answered that were submitted ahead of time. Okay, so let me scroll back up to the top and I'll start catching up here. So yeah, so if you have questions about SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams Dev, Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot plugins, SharePoint Embedded, happy to talk about any of that stuff. Okay, here we go. So Kurt, first question Kurt's got. So will SharePoint Embedded support SharePoint Premium features? And the answer, and I assume you're asking about things like the AI, some of the AI capabilities, a lot of the stuff with Purview, security, compliance, e-discovery. Best of my knowledge, but what I understand is yes, is that when you have content that's inside of SharePoint Embedded, you get all the benefits of everything that you have access to related to documents inside of SharePoint Embedded, inside your Microsoft 365 tenant, and if it's the data stored inside SharePoint Embedded in your tenant. So that includes things like security and compliance, tagging, auditing, record holds, all the e-discovery stuff. You'll be able to interact with the content, like find the content when you're sending a new email to someone and say, I want to attach content. You'll be able to find, just like you have options like pick from this OneDrive, or pick from this Microsoft Teams, or pick from my local machine. You'll also have the option to like pick from pick from your SharePoint Embedded instances as well. And so the way that that'll work is that you'll have your SharePoint Embedded app that you've defined, that will show up as the list. And then from there, the next folder down, or the next level down in your folder selection, are the different SharePoint Embedded containers where you can store that app has access to. And then from there, it could be like folders and files inside of those. So think about it the exact same way. Your SharePoint Embedded app, think about that as like a I was going to use the term container. I can't use that. Think about that as like the main grouping. So that would be like on my computer. And then the next one is the containers. And the next one from that, once you pick a container, it's then the files and folders in that container. So I see, let's see, that was one. So that's Kurt's first question there. And it says, next question was from Kurt, says, it looks to be a developer program for Copilot plugins that you need to register for, lots in preview. So if you're talking about the Bing, I know Kurt, you and I were going back and forth this a little bit yesterday in Discord. If you're referring to the Bing Copilot program, I don't have much information on that. Copilot for Bing and Copilot for 365, I like to think of those as very different things. Under the covers, they're not the same thing. For example, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is leveraging something called the semantic index, which is like ChatGPT plus all of the data in my organization in Microsoft 365. Bing doesn't do that. Bing isn't working with my data, right? Copilot for 365 is working with my data plus all the stuff that it knows. Copilot plugins for Microsoft 365 allow me to augment the data that Copilot for 365 has access to. And then if I use something called a graph connector, I can inject data into the semantic index for my tenant that Copilot for Microsoft 365 can understand. When it comes to building plugins for Microsoft 365, when it comes to building plugins for Copilot for Microsoft 365, originally you had to have that turned on in your tenant. As of like last week or 2 weeks ago, it's now turned on all tenants. I don't know what the story is for publishing one to the store for commercial use. So I'm not entirely sure there. That I don't think is in preview, but it might be. So, and there probably is a developer program. There's like a TAP program there's a TAP program associated with it. I don't have any information on it just yet, but I know that Microsoft is definitely working hard at this, and I see them like I'm on LinkedIn. I'm seeing a friend of mine runs the developer program for Copilot for Microsoft 365, and I've seen a bunch of people that he's been adding to his team recently, including someone that just announced that they were joining them today. So it's something I don't have as much info on right now because it's been evolving very, very quickly. Adam had a question, Adam Highland. So what's a good use case for a bot-enabled adaptive card extension? So think about, an adaptive card extension, this is a great question. An adaptive card extension originally was giving us the way in the SharePoint framework to build one of those little dashboard widgets, kind of like a web part, small web part that would go into Viva Connections, the Viva Connections dashboards. And they were all client-side. They were 100% client-side based, which meant that our SharePoint framework code, all written in TypeScript, running client-side, would essentially be swapping out different adaptive cards. From a high level, swapping out different adaptive cards and fetching data from backend services and adding that data and meshing that data with an adaptive card that's then presented to the user. The challenge that some organizations and ISVs had was that some of that, when the data needed to be fetched or retrieved from secured services, it needed to be done server side. They could not go through and grab data client side, because when you grab data from client side, you're using a public client, an access token you've obtained with a public client, where sometimes you want to make sure that the data is more secured and is done using, in the Microsoft Authentication Library, MSAL, is referred to using what's it called? Confidential client. So you're authenticating and obtaining a token using a client ID and a secret, and then potentially also that's an OBO token, one that you've retrieved on behalf of someone else, or the app is retrieved on behalf of you who's currently logged in, to then go talk to that external system and get data. All that has to happen server side. The way the adaptive cards, when they first came out, we couldn't do that because adaptive cards were all client side, not server side. And there was extra work that we had to do to call some backend service and blah, blah, blah. And it was just slow. What the bot-enabled adaptive cards allows us to do is that when we show that adaptive card in an ACE on Viva Connections, when you submit the card, instead of it going to the SharePoint framework, which then would have to go to some backend service to try and then do a different style of authentication to get data and come back, now that adaptive card response goes straight to a server-side process, a bot. And that bot can then do authentication and obtain an access token to go work with the backend service to update an adaptive card and give it back to the ACE. Because I know, Adam, you're familiar with building bots for Microsoft Teams, wink, wink. And if you recall, we talked about doing single sign-on with bots. This basically is allowing us to use that exact same infrastructure that we have with bots in Teams for ACEs. So it's just you would only be responding back to the request when you receive a request. When your bot receives a request, you're always going to be responding with an adaptive card, not with a text-based string. Okay, so your adaptive cards submit straight to your bot. So if you think about the stuff that we covered in that Teams class that you and I did, basically everything where we talked about how bots can interact with adaptive cards and just read right back and forth. Think about like adaptive card extensions that are bot enabled. Instead of them using the SharePoint framework, they're actually like working with the same infrastructure we do with bots. It's the exact same thing. In fact, it was one of the feedback items I gave to Microsoft was, why are you referring to this as a SharePoint framework thing? Because it's not. This is a Teams thing. So everyone thought, like, when the SharePoint framework had an update for it, they're like, oh look, now we can do bot enabled. Now we can do like adaptive card extensions. Let's see how we do this with the SharePoint framework. No, that's not how it works. This is all bot based. Jean-Paul, do you suggest the use of the SharePoint embedded VS Code extension? Yeah, it's great. It's stable. The only thing it really gives you is it just simplifies the setup process. So it simplifies creating your first container type and then registering that container. Creating your Microsoft Intra app, creating a container type. That container type is a trial container, and it's associated with the Intra app that was just, or Azure AD app that was just created. And then it registers that container type in your tenant. You don't need it. You could do all this stuff yourself using the SharePoint Online PowerShell and REST requests. However, it does make it a little bit easier. That's really all it does, though. It also does let you view the containers you've created, so you don't have to write any code to go through and view the containers. And it also allows you to add guest apps to the container type to let other apps have access to the data in the containers that are attached to the container type. So yes, I like the extension. I don't show that in my article, the 2 articles I did or the videos, because it didn't exist at the time, but I definitely recommend it. In fact, my class, the one that I told you about that I'm building for Microsoft right now, is oops, that has a big stamp on it that says internal only. I'm glad I showed that really fast. Because you couldn't see it. There's no way you could read that. The class that I'm working on for Microsoft, it definitely uses that extension. It does make your life easier as a developer. In production, you're still going to have to do all that stuff manually, because you can't convert a trial container type to a billable container type. You have to create the container type as trial or billable from the get-go. All right, let's go through some other questions here. Kurt, okay, there we go. Now I'm caught up. Oh, this is Kenny. SharePoint Online SPFx web parts not loading correctly until page refresh. I need more info than that. I need more context. I guess what I would say is that you're just going to have to, if it wasn't loading for me, I mean, the first thing that I would do if it's not loading is, is it nothing showing up, or is the error popping up saying like technical details, and you click on it and try and read there? Look at the console and see what's going on in the console. So that's just going to be your standard troubleshooting based stuff that you got to start with. So Kurt, e-signature. So I assume that you're referring to what we talked about with your question on SharePoint Embedded and SharePoint Premium. Yeah, I think e-signature is one of those things that I believe is definitely going to be, you would be able to take advantage of, because the only thing that if you have SharePoint Premium, then the content that you have in SharePoint Embedded can leverage all of the stuff that your tenant has access to, or that your tenant is licensed for, like Purview, like SharePoint Premium. So yeah, you would be able to leverage e-signature inside the content that's in your SharePoint Embedded investments. Rick, any news about SharePoint Framework and SharePoint SE? Please tell me they have new guidance. Nope. I've got nothing for you. In fact, last week they shipped the 24H1 release of it, and when I saw it, there's nothing in the announcement from the 24H1 release, either in the announcement or the documentation for it. Nowhere is SharePoint Framework referenced. I've reached out to the people who are actually responsible for that update, and I was like, what's up? What's up with SPFx? And they did respond to me, but I don't have an answer. The SharePoint Framework team was also unaware that that release was coming out, and they are also looped into the thread. So right now, I got nothing for you. If I were you, I would ping right back at the GitHub issue that you commented on back in September, I think it was, maybe since then. I'd go right back and be like, reference the 24H1 and be like, what's up? Because they are looking at that issue, as that's the one that I referenced and saying, hey, we've heard nothing from Microsoft since then. So still no news. Kurt, SharePoint Premium is an upcharge. You bet it is. Syntax features. Yeah, so SharePoint Premium, syntax features are what, like syntax was retired. It's now called SharePoint Premium is basically just the rebranding of syntax. So everything that you thought of as syntax still applies. I'm so glad they got rid of that name. I always wanted to call it Semtex and like, oh, it's going to blow up in my face. But no. Will there be a SharePoint embedded API to be able to interact with the services? I would assume so. In fact, a lot of the services, I've seen some sample REST requests that you can make to interact with it, from e-discovery stuff, holds, records, stuff like that. So yes. Is there a best place for us to post SharePoint embedded questions in Discord? Just like do it in the you have access to the mastermind for the SharePoint Framework course. You've got access to the Teams Accelerator one as well. You've got access to, and then there's like the public one that's like Microsoft 365 Dev. I don't have a SharePoint Embedded channel in there. I do have a couple articles on my site related to SharePoint Embedded. So if you go to like voitanos.io/tags, you'll see one of the categories is SharePoint Embedded, and I've got 3 articles that are posted there. You can post them in the comments there. I will see all of that stuff eventually. I'm going to be doing more stuff with SharePoint Embedded. I have to get through this course first, and then I'm releasing a lot more stuff going on. But yeah, I am like literally, I'm not even neck deep. I'm eyes deep into this course and building the content for it. So you will see I've learned a lot more over the last couple of weeks. So if best place to answer questions about it. I am working with some organizations, some ISVs with it as well on like a coaching basis. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out, and I'm happy to do that as well. Let's see. Will Microsoft ever raise the 5,000 view threshold? Good joke. The fact that I'm not going to say yes or no to that, but I mean, the fact that this has been something we've all had for like 15 or 20 years or 10 to 15 years, whatever it was. Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath. The plugin is using OpenAI. Oh, Kurt, you posted the URL. So the ACE is the preferred approach. Okay, so if you're built, so a couple things there. What you're using for your plugin, whatever plugin you're using, whatever endpoint you're using, OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, I don't think that's really going to matter in terms of the dev program. As far as the ACE question, if you want to build like those little widgets for Viva connections and the Viva dashboards, adaptive card extensions is the only option you have for those kind of extensions. The other 2 customization options we have with Viva connections are SharePoint Framework extensions, if you want to change the way pages look, or if you want to build a web part, it's an SPFx web part. So SharePoint Framework is your customization and extensibility option for Viva connections. Kenny, can I use React 18 with SharePoint Framework? No. We are still stuck on version React 17, which my next article, my next newsletter is going to be my spring 2024 wish list on what I wish that they would do, and that's one of them because we are way overdue on having an updated version of React, but we'll see. Okay, I don't see any other questions that are posted. We've got about a minute and a half left. Let me do a little bit of wrap up here real quick. And just to make sure you're aware of when the next one's coming up. Our next office hours is coming up. So our next office hours, let me move me over there. Our next office hours, you can submit your questions ahead of time. You can do that by either posting a question to Discord. You can or subscribe to the newsletter. At the bottom of all of my newsletters, you will see a link to the next version of the office hours. I will post a link to the next instance of it in the next newsletter that comes out. You can keep in touch that way. I'm also going to set up a page on the Voitanos site where you can find the dates for the next one. The next one will be on April the 17th, 2024. That is already published and that event is already live on my YouTube channel. So when you're done with this one, go right back to my YouTube channel. You click on live and you will see an upcoming event. The only upcoming event, at least right now, is the next office hours on April the 17th, 2024. You can be notified of that by clicking the notify button, and YouTube will let you know. There is also an event listed in our Discord server. You can learn more about that by going to voitanos.io/Discord. I'll put a link to that in the chat. And there's an event there where you can also grab you can download an ICS file to import into your calendar so that you can get a reminder when we're going to go live. Little bit of a risk with that one that I may have to reschedule that one due to a conflict, but we'll just see. I'm supposed to be teaching a class that week, but they have yet to do all their stuff. So I'm still waiting for them to finish up all the paperwork and stuff to make sure that I can actually go. But we'll see. All right. So with that, I'm at the top of the hour, actually 50 seconds past it. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off, everyone. I want to thank every one of you for showing up today. I really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this, if you have feedback for me, drop a comment below this video to let me know stuff that you wish that would change, stuff I do differently. I'm always open to feedback. The only way that I can make this better is by hearing from you and hearing what you think. So I really appreciate if you'd let me know. All right. So with that, everyone have a great day, and I will see you in about a month. Bye, everybody.